Imagine standing at the edge of darkness itself, not the gentle darkness of a moonless night, nor the comforting shadow of a quiet room, but a darkness so complete, so absolute, that light itself surrenders long before reaching its depths. This is where our journey begins tonight, at the threshold of the most mysterious place on our entire planet. 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface, in a realm where pressure would crush steel like paper and temperatures hover just above freezing, lies a world that has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. This is the Mariana Trench, Earth's deepest scar, a place so remote and so hostile that fewer human beings have visited its floor than have walked upon the surface of the moon. As you settle into the comfort of wherever you are right now, allow yourself to drift with me into this underwater universe. Oh, let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you deeper and deeper, past coral reefs that glow with impossible colors, beyond the twilight zone, where the last whispers of sunlight fade forever, and down into the crushing darkness of the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, Dia, the ancient Greek god of the underworld. Tonight, we will explore secrets that have been hidden for longer than humans have existed. We will meet creatures that seem designed by imagination rather than evolution. We will discover why this trench exists, how it formed, and what extraordinary revelations it holds about our planet, and perhaps even about the possibility of life on other worlds. But first, let us understand the sheer scale of what we are about to explore. The Mariana Trench stretches across the western Pacific Ocean like a crescent moon carved into the seafloor. If you were to take Mount Everest, the tallest point on Earth's surface, and place it at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in the trench, its peak would still lie more than a mile beneath the waves. Let that image settle in your mind as we begin our descent. The Pacific Ocean itself is vast beyond comprehension. It covers more area than all the continents combined, holding more than half of all the water on Earth. Within this immense body of water, the Mariana Trench runs for approximately 1,580 miles, though its width varies from just 43 miles at its narrowest to around 69 miles at its widest. These measurements, while impressive, fail to capture the true majesty of what lies below. Picture a canyon so deep that if you dropped a heavy steel ball from the surface, it would take more than an hour to reach the bottom, sinking through layer after layer of increasingly dark and cold water. That steel ball would experience pressure building with every passing second until, at the deepest point, the weight of the water above would exert more than 16,000 pounds of force on every square inch of its surface. This pressure is difficult to comprehend because nothing in our everyday experience comes close to it. At sea level, we experience 1 atmosphere of pressure, about 14.7 pounds per square inch. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that pressure increases to over 1,000 atmospheres. This is the equivalent of having 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of a single person. Yet even in this crushing environment, life persists, not merely survives, but thrives in ways that challenge our understanding of what life requires to exist. As we journey deeper into this documentary, we will encounter these remarkable organisms and learn how they have adapted to conditions that would instantly destroy any surface creature. The story of human awareness of the Mariana Trench begins with exploration and curiosity, those twin engines that have driven our species to venture into every environment our planet offers. For most of human history, the deep ocean remained not just unexplored, but unconsidered. Ancient mariners knew the surface of the sea intimately, its moods, its currents, its dangers, but what lay beneath the waves was the realm of mythology and imagination. Greek philosophers speculated about the ocean's depths, but they lacked any means of investigation. Plato wrote of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves, while Aristotle attempted to catalogue marine life based on what fishermen brought to shore. The deep ocean, that vast majority of the seafloor that lies beyond the reach of sunlight, remained utterly unknown. It was not until the 19th century that humans began to systematically explore the deep sea. The voyage of HMS Challenger, which departed from Portsmouth, England, in December 1872, marked the beginning of modern oceanography. This wooden corvette, converted from a naval vessel into a floating laboratory, would spend the next 4 years circumnavigating the globe, dropping sounding lines and dredging equipment into the depths at hundreds of locations. On March 23, 1875, The Challenger made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of Earth's geography. While taking soundings in the western Pacific Ocean, near the Mariana Islands, the expedition recorded a depth of 26,850 feet, more than 5 miles beneath the surface. The crew had stumbled upon the deepest part of the world's oceans. The location was named the Challenger, deep in honor of the vessel that discovered it. But the technology of the time allowed for nothing more than dropping weighted lines over the side and measuring how much rope played out before touching bottom. The actual exploration of this underwater chasm would have to wait for another century. The scientists aboard HMS Challenger could not have imagined what lay at the end of their sounding lines. They knew only that the ocean floor plunged to extraordinary depths at this location, far deeper than anything previously recorded. They collected samples of mud from the bottom, pulled up by their dredging equipment, and made careful notes about the location and conditions. Then they sailed on, having no way to explore further. Those mud samples, now preserved in museums around the world, contained clues that would take decades to interpret. Within them were the shells of tiny organisms, chemical signatures of underwater processes, and evidence of a unique environment unlike anywhere else on Earth. The scientists of the Challenger expedition had opened a door that subsequent generations would spend the next century and a half walking through. To understand the Mariana Trench, we must first understand the forces that created it. Our planet, which appears so solid and permanent from our daily perspective, is in fact a dynamic sphere of molten rock covered by a thin, fractured shell of cooler material. This shell, Earth's lithosphere, is broken into massive pieces called tectonic plates that float upon the semi-fluid layer beneath them. These plates move, slowly, imperceptibly to human senses, but inexorably over geological time. They carry continents, reshape oceans, build mountains, and create trenches. The Mariana Trench owes its existence to the collision between two of these great plates, the Pacific Plate and the Philippine Sea Plate. The Pacific Plate is ancient and massive, the largest tectonic plate on Earth. It underlies most of the Pacific Ocean and has been moving slowly westward for hundreds of millions of years. Where it meets the smaller Philippine Sea Plate, something remarkable happens, a process called subduction. Subduction occurs when one tectonic plate slides beneath another. The Pacific Plate, older and denser than the Philippine Sea Plate, dips downward like a giant ramp descending into the Earth's interior. As it angles into the mantle, it creates a deep furrow on the ocean floor, the Mariana Trench floor. This process began approximately 50 million years ago and continues to this day. The Pacific Plate descends at a rate of about 2 to 4 inches per year, which seems impossibly slow until you calculate how much movement that represents over geological time. In 50 million years, the plate has traveled hundreds of miles into Earth's interior, recycled through processes we are only beginning to understand. As the Pacific Plate sinks, it carries water and sediments down with it. These materials, exposed to increasing heat and pressure, undergo chemical changes that release water into the surrounding mantle. This water lowers the melting point of the overlying rock, creating pockets of magma that rise toward the surface. This is why the Mariana Trench is flanked by a chain of volcanic islands, the Mariana Islands themselves. These volcanoes are the surface expression of the subduction process, built from magma that forms as the Pacific Plate descends. The islands rise from the sea in a graceful arc that mirrors the curve of the trench, a visual reminder of the tremendous forces operating deep beneath the waves. The creation of the Mariana Trench was not a sudden event, but a gradual process spanning tens of millions of years. We can trace this history through the rocks and sediments found in the region, each layer telling part of the story of Earth's restless surface. The oldest rocks in the trench date back billions of years, carried there on the Pacific Plate from their original formation sites far across the ocean. As we descend into the Mariana Trench, it helps to understand its physical geography, the shape and structure of this underwater canyon that makes it unlike any other place on Earth. The trench is not a simple crack in the seafloor, but a complex system of ridges, valleys, and plateaus carved by the ongoing forces of plate tectonics. The trench forms a crescent shape, curving from northeast to southwest through the western Pacific. If viewed from space, It would appear as a thin dark line against the blue of the ocean, barely visible yet representing the deepest gash in Earth's surface. The curvature of the trench follows the boundary between the colliding plates, tracing the line where the Pacific plate begins its descent. At its northern end, the trench passes near the island of Guam, a territory of the United States that serves as a gateway for scientific expeditions to the region. Guam's location, perched on the edge of the Philippine Sea plate, gives it a unique vantage point for studying the geological processes occurring just offshore. The trench can be divided into several distinct sections, each with its own characteristics. The northern section tends to be shallower, though still impossibly deep by human standards. As you travel southward, the trench gradually deepens, reaching its maximum depth at the Challenger Deep, located near the southern end of the structure. The Challenger Deep itself is a slot-shaped depression within the trench, a place where the ocean floor drops to its ultimate depth. Modern measurements using multi-beam sonar have refined our understanding of this location, revealing that the deepest point lies approximately 36,070 feet below sea level, though this figure varies slightly depending on the measurement technique used and the definition of sea level employed. To either side of the main trench, the seafloor rises in a series of terraces and slopes. These features result from the complex interactions between the descending plate and the overlying water and sediments. Underwater landslides, triggered by earthquakes along the subduction zone, occasionally reshape these slopes, sending cascades of mud and rock plunging into the depths. The walls of the trench are not smooth, but carved with countless smaller canyons and ridges. Water currents, though weak at these depths, have spent millions of years sculpting the rock. Occasional disturbances, earthquakes, submarine landslides, the impacts of sinking debris add new features to this ever-changing landscape. At the very bottom of the trench lies a layer of sediment that has accumulated over millions of years. This sediment consists of particles that have slowly sunk through miles of water, the remains of surface organisms, dust blown from distant continents, microplastics from human pollution, and occasionally larger objects that have found their way to the bottom. The sediment at the bottom of the Challenger Deep is surprisingly soft, with the consistency of wet clay. When the first humans reached this depth in 1960, they reported that their vessels stirred up clouds of this fine material, reducing visibility to near zero. This sediment is rich in organic matter, providing food for the organisms that make their homes in this extreme environment. Before we venture to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, let us consider the ocean of water that lies above it. Nearly 7 miles of water that any object or organism must traverse to reach the deepest point. This water is not uniform but divided into distinct layers, each with its own characteristics and inhabitants. The journey from surface to seafloor passes through 5 major ocean zones, each defined by the amount of sunlight that penetrates to that depth. Understanding these zones helps us appreciate the gradual transition from the familiar world above to the alien environment below. The epipelagic zone, also called the sunlight zone, extends from the surface to about 656 feet deep. This is the ocean most of us know, warm, bright, and teeming with life. Here, sunlight penetrates sufficiently for photosynthesis, allowing phytoplankton to flourish and forming the base of the marine food web. Nearly all the ocean's plant life exists in this thin upper layer, along with the animals that feed on it. Swimming downward from this zone, we enter the mesopelagic or twilight zone, extending from 656 feet to about 3,280 feet. Sunlight still reaches these depths, but barely, perhaps 1% of surface illumination at the upper boundary, fading to nothing at the lower edge. Many creatures here have adapted to this perpetual dusk, developing large eyes to capture what little light exists or producing their own illumination through bioluminescence. Below the twilight zone lies the bathypelagic zone. The midnight zone is stretching from 3,280 feet to 13,123 feet. No sunlight penetrates here. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of bioluminescent creature. Water temperatures hover just above freezing, and pressure mounts continuously with each foot of descent. The abyssopelagic zone, the abyss, ranges from 13,123 feet. So, life becomes increasingly sparse at these depths. though it never disappears entirely. The organisms that live here have evolved remarkable adaptations to survive the crushing pressure and eternal darkness. Food is scarce, consisting mainly of marine snow, the constant rain of organic debris falling from the sunlit waters above. Finally, we reach the hadopelagic zone, the Hadal zone, named for Hades, god of the underworld. This zone exists only in the deepest trenches, below 19,685 feet. The Mariana Trench is the primary realm of the Hadal zone, though similar depths exist in a few other trenches around the world. Here, at the absolute bottom of the ocean, conditions are so extreme that they were long thought incompatible with life. Each of these zones presents increasing challenges for any organism attempting to survive there. Pressure increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet of descent. Temperature drops, eventually stabilizing at just above freezing. Food becomes scarcer, oxygen becomes harder to extract from the water, and the absolute darkness eliminates vision as a useful sense. Yet life has found ways to thrive at every level of this vertical ocean. As we continue our descent, we will meet some of the remarkable creatures that call each zone home. Let us pause in our descent to consider two of the most defining characteristics of the deep ocean: pressure and darkness. These twin challenges have shaped every aspect of life in the Mariana Trench, forcing organisms to evolve solutions that seem almost impossible to surface dwellers. Pressure in the deep ocean is perhaps the most difficult challenge to overcome. At sea level, we live under a blanket of air that weighs approximately 14.7 pounds per square inch, 1 atmosphere. Our bodies have evolved over millions of years to thrive under this pressure, and we rarely notice it. But descend into the ocean, and this pressure increases rapidly. Water is much denser than air, and its weight accumulates quickly. At just 33 feet below the surface, a depth reached by many recreational divers, the pressure has already doubled to 2 atmospheres. At 100 feet, it has quadrupled. Continue this progression to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and the pressure reaches over 1,000 atmospheres, more than 16,000 pounds per square inch. This pressure affects everything. Gas bubbles compress and eventually dissolve completely into the surrounding water. Protein molecules, the building blocks of life, change shape under extreme pressure, losing their biological function. Cell membranes, which depend on a delicate balance of fluid and rigid components, can become too stiff to function. Yet life persists. Deep-sea organisms have evolved several strategies to cope with pressure. Some produce special molecules that help stabilize proteins, preventing them from deforming under pressure. Others have modified their cell membranes, incorporating different types of fatty molecules that remain flexible even under extreme compression. The darkness of the deep ocean presents its own set of challenges. Sunlight, which provides both energy and information for surface creatures, simply cannot penetrate to the depths of the Mariana Trench. The last measurable sunlight fades away by about 3,300 feet, less than 1/10 of the way to the bottom. Below this depth, the ocean exists in perpetual night. For creatures that evolved in the sunlit surface waters, this darkness would be disorienting, even terrifying. But deep-sea organisms have never known light. They have evolved to navigate, hunt, and communicate in ways that do not depend on vision. Many deep-sea creatures have developed extreme sensitivity to other senses. Some can detect minute vibrations in the water, sensing the presence of prey or predators through disturbances that would be imperceptible to surface dwellers. Others have evolved extraordinarily sensitive organs for detecting chemical traces, essentially smelling their way through the darkness. And then there is bioluminescence, the production of light through chemical reactions within an organism's body. In the deep ocean, bioluminescence is astonishingly common. It is estimated that up to 90% of deep-sea creatures produce light in some form. They use this light for communication, for hunting, for defense, and for finding mates in the endless darkness. The light produced by bioluminescent creatures is typically blue or green, colors that travel well through seawater. Some creatures produce constant glows, while others flash in specific patterns. Some eject clouds of luminescent material to confuse predators, while others use light to attract prey. As our imaginary descent continues, let us also consider the temperature of the water through which we pass. The ocean's temperature varies dramatically from surface to seafloor, And understanding this gradient helps us appreciate the conditions that deep-sea creatures must endure. At the surface, ocean temperatures vary widely depending on location and season. Tropical waters may reach 85 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, while polar seas hover just above freezing, but descend below the reach of sunlight, and this variation disappears. The deep ocean maintains a remarkably consistent temperature around the world, just above freezing, typically between 32 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit. This cold is not the biting cold of a winter wind, but a pervasive, inescapable chill that pervades everything. Metabolic rates slow in cold water, meaning that deep-sea creatures live their lives in a kind of slow motion compared to their surface relatives. Growth is slower, reproduction is slower, and lifespans are often longer. The boundary between warm surface waters and cold deep waters is called the thermocline. This layer, typically found between 656 and 3,280 feet deep, acts as a barrier that separates the ocean into two distinct realms. Above the thermocline, seasonal variations and surface currents mix the water. Below it, temperatures remain stable year-round. In the Mariana Trench, temperatures at the bottom hover around 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, cold, but not as cold as you might expect for a place so far from the sun. This relative warmth results from the slow compression of water as it sinks. The immense pressure at these depths actually generates a small amount of heat, slightly warming the water. This combination of extreme cold and extreme pressure creates challenges for any chemical processes. Reactions slow down dramatically, and molecules behave differently than they would under surface conditions. The organisms that live at these depths have evolved biochemistry specifically adapted to function in this alien environment. For centuries, humans could only imagine what lay at the bottom of the ocean. Ancient maps depicted sea monsters in the unexplored depths, while sailors told tales of creatures large enough to drag ships beneath the waves. The actual exploration of the deep ocean would require technology that did not exist until the 20th century. The first systematic glimpses of the deep came not from direct observation, but from the samples brought up by dredging equipment. The HMS Challenger expedition of 1876 dragged weighted nets across the ocean floor at hundreds of locations, hauling up mud, rocks, and the occasional specimen of deep-sea life. These samples proved that life existed even at great depths, but they provided only fragmentary evidence of what that life might look like. The development of the bathysphere in the 1930s marked the first step toward a direct human observation of the deep. William Beebe and Otis Barton descended in this small steel sphere to depths of over 3,000 feet off the coast of Bermuda. Through small windows of fused quartz, they observed creatures that no human had ever seen alive, fish with rows of lights along their bodies, jellyfish that pulsed with bioluminescence, and squid that darted through their lights. Beebe's descriptions of these dives captured the imagination of the public and the scientific community. He wrote of a world as strange as that of Mars, and described creatures that seemed to belong to science fiction, rather than science fact. But the bathysphere was limited by its tether to the surface ship, and depths beyond 3,000 feet remained unexplored. The next major advance came with the development of the bathyscaphe, a self-propelled submersible vessel designed to descend to extreme depths. Unlike the bathysphere, which hung from a cable, the bathyscaphe carried its own flotation and could move independently once it reached its target depth. The most famous bathyscaphe was the Trieste, designed by Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard and purchased by the United States Navy in 1958. This remarkable vessel consisted of a heavy steel sphere for observers, attached beneath a large tank filled with gasoline. The gasoline, lighter than water, provided flotation, while iron shot served as ballast that could be released to control the descent and ascent. On January 23, 1960, the Trieste carried 2 men to the bottom of the Challenger, deep: Jacques Piccard, son of the vessel's designer, and Don Walsh, a United States Navy lieutenant. Their descent marked the first time human beings had reached the deepest point on Earth. The journey to the bottom of the Mariana Trench began years before the Trieste slipped beneath the waves on that historic day in January 1960. It began in laboratories and workshops in theoretical calculations and experimental trials. In the dreams of scientists who believed that human beings could survive at the greatest depths of the ocean, Auguste Piccard was a man accustomed to extremes. Before turning his attention to the ocean, he had set records for high-altitude balloon flights, ascending into the stratosphere to study cosmic rays. He understood the engineering challenges of creating a pressurized vessel that could protect human life in environments where unprotected exposure meant instant death. The design of the Trieste drew on principles that Piccard had developed over experimentation. The key insight was that a perfectly spherical pressure vessel could withstand enormous external pressure because the sphere distributes forces evenly across its surface. Any deviation from perfect sphericity would create weak points where the pressure could crush the vessel. The crucisphere of the Trieste was machined from thick steel with extraordinary precision. Its walls were over 3.5 inches thick, and its interior measured just 6 feet in diameter, barely enough room for 2 men to sit side by side during a descent that would take hours. Small portholes of cone-shaped acrylic plastic allowed the occupants to observe the outside world. Above the crucisphere hung the float, a massive tank filled with gasoline that provided the buoyancy needed to support the heavy steel sphere. Gasoline was chosen because it is lighter than water yet nearly incompressible, meaning that it would maintain its lifting power even at extreme depths. The float measured about 50 feet long and held 22,000 gallons of gasoline. To descend, the Trieste carried tons of iron shot in hoppers at the bottom of the float. Releasing this ballast would make the vessel lighter than the surrounding water, causing it to rise. Electromagnets held the iron shot in place. If electrical power failed for any reason, the magnets would release their load and the vessel would automatically ascend. This fail-safe design reflected the extreme danger of the environment the Trieste would enter. The United States Navy recognized the strategic value of deep ocean exploration and purchased the Trieste in 1958. They brought the vessel to the Naval Electronics Laboratory in San Diego, where engineers modified and strengthened it for the ultimate challenge, Project Necton. The mission to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Jacques Piccard was born to the sea, or rather to the extremes of nature. His father, Auguste, had taught him to think in terms of engineering solutions to impossible problems, to trust mathematics and physics even when intuition rebelled. Jacques had worked alongside his father on the development of the Trieste and knew the vessel intimately. Don Walsh was a different kind of explorer. A career naval officer, he had been assigned to the deep submergence program and quickly proved his aptitude for the demands of undersea exploration, where Piccard brought decades of experience with pressure vessels and extreme environments. Walsh brought military precision and cool-headedness under pressure. Together, these two men would spend nearly 9 hours confined in a space barely larger than a closet, descending through miles of black water to a place no human had ever been. Their partnership represented the collaboration between civilian science and military capability that characterized the space age, a time when nations competed to demonstrate their technological prowess in the most challenging environments imaginable. In the weeks leading up to the dive, Piccard and Walsh conducted test dives to progressively greater depths, checking the Trieste systems and their own reactions to the unusual environment. Each dive brought new data and new confidence, but also new reminders of the risks they faced. The deep ocean offered no margin for error. A leak in the pressure sphere would be catastrophic. An electrical failure might strand them at depth. A malfunction in the ballast release system could trap them at the bottom forever. The men knew these risks but accepted them, driven by the same impulse that has always pushed explorers to venture beyond the known world. January 23, 1960, dawned grey and rough over the Pacific Ocean. The Trieste floated in the waters above the Challenger Deep, attended by the USS Wandang and other support vessels. Waves tossed the small bathyscaphe, and spray washed over its deck. The weather conditions were far from ideal, but the expedition had already waited through several postponements, and the decision was made to proceed. Piccard and Walsh climbed into the pressure sphere through a tunnel that ran down through the gasoline-filled float. They secured the heavy hatch above them, checked their instruments one final time, and signaled to the surface crew that they were ready. At 8:23 a.m. local time, water began flooding the float's ballast tanks, and the Trieste began to sink. The descent was slow by the standards of normal experience, but fast for deep-sea exploration. The Trieste sank at approximately 3 feet per second, about the pace of a slow walk. At this rate, reaching the bottom would take nearly 5 hours. In the early stages of the descent, some light still penetrated from the surface. Pickard and Walsh watched through their small portholes as the blue of the upper ocean gradually darkened. Within minutes, they had passed through the epipelagic zone and entered the twilight realm of the mesopelagic. At about 300 feet, they crossed the thermocline and felt the water temperature drop dramatically. The walls of the pressure sphere, in contact with the cold water outside, began to chill. Condensation formed on the inside surfaces. The two men, already cramped and uncomfortable, now had to cope with persistent cold and damp. The descent continued through hours of increasing darkness. Occasionally, bioluminescent creatures flashed past the portholes, momentary sparks of blue-green light in the absolute blackness. These glimpses of life reminded the explorers that they were not alone, that even in this hostile environment, organisms had found ways to survive and even flourish. At 32,500 feet, deeper than any human had ever been, a loud cracking sound echoed through the sphere. Both men tensed, expecting the worst. But the instruments showed no change in pressure inside the sphere, and after a moment's consideration, they decided to continue. They later discovered that the sound came from an outer acrylic window that had developed a crack under the extreme pressure. The inner window held, protecting them from the crushing water outside. At 6 p.m. local time, nearly 5 hours after beginning their descent, Pickard and Walsh felt a gentle bump. They looked at their instruments, then at each other. They had reached the bottom. The depth gauge showed 37,800 feet. Later revised by more accurate measurements to approximately 35,797 feet. Either way, the two men had reached the deepest point ever touched by human beings. Above them lay nearly 7 miles of water. Below them lay only the primordial mud of the ocean floor. Pickard later described the moment in his book. 7 miles down, he wrote of looking out through the porthole into what appeared to be absolute nothingness, a darkness so complete that it seemed to absorb the lights of the Trieste entirely. Only gradually did his eyes adjust enough to make out details of the seafloor. What he saw surprised him. Instead of barren rock, the bottom was covered with a thick layer of fine, light-colored sediment. Their landing had stirred up clouds of this material, reducing visibility dramatically. But as the sediment slowly settled, they began to make out the nature of their surroundings. The seafloor was not flat, but gently undulating, like a desert landscape of dunes and hollows. The sediment appeared almost cream-colored in the Trieste's lights, organic material that had drifted down through miles of water over millions of years. Here and there, they could see tracks and burrows, evidence that something lived in this inhospitable realm. And then, remarkably, they saw a fish. Walsh spotted it first, a flatfish, perhaps a sole or flounder, lying on the bottom near the Trieste. The creature appeared about 1 foot long, with eyes on the top of its head and a pale, almost white coloration. It swam away slowly as they watched, apparently disturbed by the strange vessel that had invaded its domain. The sighting of this fish electrified the scientific community when it was reported. Here was proof that vertebrate life could survive at the absolute bottom of the ocean, under pressure that would crush almost any known creature. The fish's existence suggested that the deep-sea food web extended all the way to the Hadal Zone, supporting complex life forms even in Earth's most extreme environment. Later analysis would question whether the creature was actually a fish or perhaps some type of sea cucumber or other invertebrate. The sighting was brief and the conditions poor. But the broader point stood. Life existed at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, adapted to pressures and darkness that surface creatures could never survive. Pickard and Walsh remained at the bottom of the Challenger Deep for approximately 20 minutes. This brief stay was all that the mission plan allowed, time enough to make observations and confirm their achievement, but not long enough to risk the many things that could go wrong at such extreme depth. During those 20 minutes, they made what observations they could through the silted water and the small portholes of their sphere. They noted the composition of the sediment, the temperature readings from their instruments, and the apparent absence of strong currents at the bottom. They took photographs, though the visibility was too poor for most of these to be useful. The psychological impact of those 20 minutes would stay with both men for the rest of their lives. They had ventured to a place that belonged to another world, a realm as alien as any planet in the solar system. The absolute darkness, the crushing pressure, the knowledge that they were farther from help than any human beings had ever been. These experiences left permanent impressions. Walsh later recalled the strange feeling of isolation that came over him at the bottom. Despite being in constant communication with the surface vessels via acoustic telephone, he felt utterly alone. The sound of his own breathing, the hum of the Triest's instruments, the occasional creak of the pressure hull adjusting to the tremendous forces around it, these became the only sounds in a universe of silence. Pickard, more accustomed to extreme environments from his years of high-altitude ballooning, found a certain peace in the experience. He had dedicated his life to pushing the boundaries of human exploration, and here he was at the ultimate boundary, the deepest place on Earth. Whatever happened next, he had achieved something that could never be taken away. At 1:26 p.m., the two men released some of the iron ballast from the Trieste's hoppers. The vessel stirred, lightening as the heavy shot fell away to become permanent additions to the floor of the Challenger deep. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the Trieste began to rise. The ascent from the bottom of the Mariana Trench took even longer than the descent, approximately 3 hours and 15 minutes. Without the weight of the iron ballast, the Trieste rose steadily through the water column, carrying its two occupants back toward the world of light and air. As they rose, Pickard and Walsh watched the depth gauge slowly counting backward through miles of water. The pressure decreased, though not enough for them to feel any difference within their protected sphere. The temperature remained constant, cold, dark water all the way up through the bathypelagic zone. Somewhere around 3,000 feet, they noticed the first hints of light. Not direct sunlight, which could not penetrate to that depth, but a faint lightening of the water that indicated they were approaching the mesopelagic zone. After hours in absolute darkness, even this dim illumination seemed remarkable. The final stages of the ascent brought increasing light and warmth. The water changed from black to deep blue to lighter blue. Fish appeared, not the strange creatures of the deep, but familiar forms that suggested they were nearing the surface world. At 4:56 p.m., the Trieste broke the surface of the Pacific Ocean. They had been submerged for 8 hours and 35 minutes. Support crews quickly approached to help secure the vessel and assist the two explorers in emerging from their tiny sphere. Pickard and Walsh climbed out into the fresh air, blinking in the daylight, their legs unsteady after so many hours of confinement. They were greeted as heroes, the first human beings to reach the deepest point on Earth and return to tell of it. The Trieste's journey to the Challenger deep marked a turning point in human exploration of our planet. For the first time, we knew from direct experience what conditions existed at the absolute bottom of the ocean. The readings from the dive's instruments, the observations made by Pickard and Walsh, and the very fact of their successful return all contributed to a new understanding of Earth's last frontier. The dive proved that life could exist at Haddle depths. The fish or other creature observed by the explorers demonstrated that the deep-sea ecosystem extended all the way to the bottom of the ocean. This discovery would inspire decades of subsequent research into the nature of life at extreme depths. The dive also demonstrated that human technology could reach the deepest parts of the ocean. This capability had military implications during the Cold War, when both the United States and the Soviet Union were exploring ways to extend their strategic presence into every environment. The ability to operate at extreme depths opened possibilities for submarine warfare, undersea cable laying, and the recovery of objects from the ocean floor. Perhaps most importantly, the dive captured the public imagination at a time when space exploration was dominating the headlines. The Trieste's achievement reminded people that there were frontiers to explore on Earth as well as in space, and that the ocean depths held mysteries as profound as anything to be found on other planets. Yet despite the success of the Trieste mission, it would be more than 50 years before humans would again reach the bottom of the Challenger deep. The technical challenges, the expense, and the limited scientific return from brief visits combined to discourage follow-up expeditions. The focus of deep-sea exploration shifted to unmanned vehicles and to shallower depths, where more time could be spent making observations. The Mariana Trench would wait patiently for the next generation of explorers, its secrets still largely unexplored. In the decades following the Trieste's historic dive, scientists turned their attention to understanding the life forms that inhabit the deep ocean. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about where life could exist and what it required to survive. The creatures of the Mariana Trench and other deep-sea environments proved that life is far more adaptable and resilient than anyone had imagined. The deepest parts of the ocean were long thought to be lifeless. The reasoning seemed sound. No sunlight meant no photosynthesis, which meant no plants, which meant no food for animals. The crushing pressure would certainly destroy any organism adapted to surface conditions. The cold would slow chemical reactions to a standstill. Surely nothing could survive in such a hostile environment. Yet life did more than survive in the deep. It flourished. The total biomass of deep-sea organisms, while much lower than in surface waters, is nonetheless substantial. Millions of species have adapted to conditions that would instantly kill surface creatures. They have evolved solutions to every challenge the deep ocean presents. The discovery of this deep-sea life proceeded gradually through the 20th century. Each new sampling expedition, each new submersible dive revealed organisms that scientists had never seen before. By some estimates, more than 90% of deep-sea species remain undiscovered, a vast reservoir of biological diversity hidden beneath the waves. Understanding how these creatures survive requires us to rethink what life needs. The traditional requirements, light for energy, oxygen for respiration, moderate temperatures and pressures, turn out to be specific to surface life rather than universal requirements. Deep-sea organisms have found alternative approaches that work just as well in their environment. Among the most fascinating residents of the deep ocean are the gigantic creatures that grow to sizes far larger than their shallow water relatives. This phenomenon, known as deep-sea gigantism, produces some of the most spectacular organisms on Earth. Consider the giant isopod, a creature that resembles an enormous pillbug or roly-poly. Shallow water isopods rarely exceed half an inch in length, but their deep-sea cousins can grow to more than 2.5 feet. These armored scavengers crawl across the abyssal seafloor, feeding on whatever organic material falls from above. The giant spider crab of Japan, which lives at depths of up to 1,000 feet, can have a leg span of more than 12 feet, the largest of any living arthropod. These spindly creatures move slowly across the deep seafloor, their long legs picking their way through the mud and debris. Giant squid, long thought to be mythical sea monsters, can reach lengths of over 40 feet and live at depths of up to 3,000 feet. These enormous cephalopods have the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, each the size of a dinner plate, adapted to catch what little light exists in their twilight realm. Even single-celled organisms grow to unusual sizes in the deep. Xenophyophores, relatives of amoebas, can reach several inches in diameter despite being made of a single cell. They live on the deep seafloor, their delicate shells built from material collected from the surrounding sediment. Several theories attempt to explain deep-sea gigantism. One suggests that the cold temperatures of the deep, slow metabolic rates allowing organisms to grow larger over their extended lifespans. Another points to the scarcity of food, arguing that larger bodies are more efficient at surviving long periods between meals. A third theory invokes the reduced pressure on size that comes from the absence of predators. Without threats from above, organisms are free to grow as large as their energy budgets allow. In the permanent darkness of the deep ocean, finding food presents unique challenges. Predators cannot rely on vision to locate prey, and prey cannot rely on vision to detect approaching danger. The result has been an evolutionary arms race that has produced some of the strangest hunting strategies in the natural world. The anglerfish is perhaps the most famous deep-sea predator. These bizarre creatures look like something from a nightmare. Bloated bodies, gaping mouths filled with needle-like teeth, and a bioluminescent lure dangling from a modified dorsal spine. The anglerfish sits motionless in the darkness, waving its glowing lure to attract curious prey. When something approaches to investigate the light, the anglerfish strikes with explosive speed. Its expandable jaws, capable of swallowing prey, nearly as large as itself. Female anglerfish are the hunters. Males are tiny, degenerate creatures that exist only to find a female and fuse permanently with her body. Once attached, the male's body atrophies until he becomes little more than a sperm-producing parasite, nourished by the female's bloodstream. This extreme sexual dimorphism ensures that females always have a mate available when conditions allow reproduction, a valuable adaptation in an environment where encounters between individuals are rare. The viperfish employs a similar ambush strategy, but with different tools. Its lower teeth are so long that they cannot fit inside its mouth, instead protruding outward in a fearsome array. These teeth function like a cage, trapping prey that ventures too close. Like the anglerfish, the viperfish possesses bioluminescent organs that can be used to attract prey. Gulper eels, also called pelican eels, take a different approach to deep-sea hunting. Their mouths can open to enormous proportions, creating a cavernous maw that can engulf prey much larger than the eel's body. This adaptation allows them to take advantage of rare feeding opportunities. When food is scarce, the ability to eat anything you encounter becomes a survival advantage. The organisms of the Mariana Trench have evolved remarkable adaptations to survive the crushing pressure of the deep. Understanding these adaptations has provided insights into the fundamental chemistry of life and has even suggested new technologies for human use. One of the most important adaptations involves the fats that make up cell membranes. At surface pressure, these membranes are fluid, allowing materials to pass in and out of cells as needed. But at Hadal depths, ordinary membrane fats would become so compressed that they would solidify, killing the cell. Deep-sea organisms have evolved membranes with higher proportions of unsaturated fats, which remain fluid even under extreme pressure. Some species also incorporate special molecules called piezolites that help maintain membrane flexibility. These adaptations are so effective that deep-sea organisms often cannot survive at the surface. Their membranes become too fluid when pressure is released. Proteins present another challenge. These complex molecules, which perform virtually every function in living cells, depend on maintaining precise three-dimensional shapes. Pressure can distort these shapes, destroying the protein's ability to function. Deep-sea organisms produce proteins with modified structures that resist pressure-induced deformation. They also produce helper molecules called chaperones that assist in maintaining correct protein shapes. Some deep-sea bacteria have been found to function normally at pressures that would destroy all enzymes from surface organisms. The most extreme pressure survivors discovered so far come from the Mariana Trench itself. Bacteria have been isolated from sediments at the bottom of the Challenger Deep that not only survive, but actually require the enormous pressure to function properly. These organisms, called piezophiles, cannot survive at surface pressure. Their biochemistry has become so adapted to the deep that normal conditions are lethal. Bioluminescence, the production of light through chemical reactions within an organism's body, is perhaps the most magical adaptation of deep-sea life. In the absence of sunlight, creatures of the deep have learned to make their own illumination. The chemistry of bioluminescence involves a light-emitting molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. When these two substances combine in the presence of oxygen, energy is released in the form of visible light. This reaction is remarkably efficient. Nearly all of the energy goes into light production rather than heat, making it far more efficient than any artificial light source. Different organisms use bioluminescence for different purposes. Some fish have light-producing organs called photophores arranged in patterns along their bodies. These patterns may serve as identification signals, allowing members of the same species to recognize each other in the darkness. They may also serve as camouflage, producing light that matches the dim glow filtering down from above and eliminating the silhouette that might attract predators from below. Many deep-sea creatures use bioluminescence for hunting. The anglerfish's glowing lure is the most famous example, but countless variations exist. Some species produce flashes of light to startle prey, causing it to move and reveal its position. Others emit steady glows that attract curious fish close enough to be captured. Bioluminescence also has defensive purposes. Some species can eject clouds of luminescent material, creating a glowing distraction that allows them to escape into the darkness. Others flash brightly when attacked, potentially startling the predator or attracting larger predators that might in turn attack the attacker. Perhaps most remarkably, some deep-sea organisms use bioluminescence for communication. The patterns and timing of flashes can convey information about species identity, reproductive status, and territorial claims. In the darkness of the deep, light becomes a language. Among the most remarkable residents of the Mariana Trench is the snailfish, a delicate-looking creature that has been recorded at depths exceeding 26,000 feet, deeper than any other fish. These small, translucent organisms have become symbols of life's ability to adapt to the most extreme conditions. Snailfish belong to the family Leporidae, which includes species adapted to a wide range of environments from tidal pools to the deepest trenches. The Haddle snailfish species found in the Mariana Trench have evolved specific adaptations that allow them to survive where no other fish can venture. Their bodies are small and lack the rigid bones that characterize most fish. Instead, their skeletons are largely composed of cartilage, which is more flexible and less likely to be damaged by extreme pressure. Their skulls contain gaps that allow the pressure inside their heads to equalize with the water outside. The cells of Haddle snailfish contain high concentrations of trimethylamine N oxide, or TMO. This molecule helps stabilize proteins against the distorting effects of pressure. The deeper a snailfish lives, the more tuor it contains, a direct relationship between biochemistry and environment. Video footage from the bottom of the Mariana Trench has captured snailfish swimming slowly through the absolute darkness, their pale bodies seeming almost ghostly in the lights of submersible vehicles. They feed on small invertebrates that inhabit the seafloor sediments, filling the role of apex predator in the Haddle ecosystem. The discovery that fish could survive at such depths surprised scientists who had assumed that vertebrate nervous systems could not function under such extreme pressure. The snailfish demonstrated that evolution can find solutions to almost any challenge, given sufficient time and selective pressure. While fish like the snailfish capture our imagination, the majority of life in the Mariana Trench consists of invertebrates, creatures without backbones that have colonized every level of the deep ocean. These organisms display a remarkable diversity of forms and survival strategies. Amphipods are among the most successful deep-sea invertebrates. These small crustaceans, related to the sandhoppers found on beaches around the world, have adapted to life at Haddle depths. Giant amphipods exceeding 4 inches in length have been collected from the deepest trenches, their bodies pale and their eyes reduced or absent. Deep-sea amphipods are scavengers, descending upon any organic material that reaches the seafloor. When researchers lower baited traps to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, amphipods arrive within hours, swarming over the bait in such numbers that the traps can become completely obscured. Their efficiency at finding and consuming food helps recycle nutrients in an environment where resources are scarce. Polychaete worms are another successful group at depth. These segmented worms build tubes in the sediment and filter food particles from the water or scrape organic material from the seafloor. Some species reach remarkable sizes in the deep, their bodies stretched into translucent ribbons several feet long. Sea cucumbers, relatives of starfish and sea urchins, are among the most abundant large animals on the deep seafloor. These cylindrical creatures crawl slowly across the sediment, ingesting mud and extracting what nutrition they can from the organic particles mixed within it. In some areas of the deep ocean, sea cucumbers make up more than 90% of the total animal biomass. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, even sea cucumbers must make special adaptations. The pressure crushes the calcium carbonate structures that normally support their bodies, so Haddle sea cucumbers have evolved to be soft and flexible. They appear almost formless, their bodies molding to the contours of the seafloor as they slowly feed. The largest population of life in the Mariana Trench cannot be seen with the naked eye. Microorganisms, bacteria, archaea, and protists dominate the deep-sea ecosystem, carrying out the chemical processes that make all other life possible. The sediments at the bottom of the Mariana Trench contain millions of microbial cells in every cubic inch. These organisms have been isolated from depths exceeding 35,000 feet, living under pressures that would destroy most life forms. They represent some of the most extreme forms of life known on Earth. Deep-sea microbes have evolved biochemistries that function under conditions that would halt normal cellular processes. Their enzymes work at temperatures just above freezing. Their cell membranes remain functional under pressures that would solidify ordinary biological materials. Their metabolic rates are extremely slow by surface standards, but sufficient to sustain life in an environment where food is scarce. Many of these microorganisms are chemolithotrophs, organisms that derive energy from inorganic chemical reactions rather than from sunlight or organic food. They oxidize hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia, and other compounds using these reactions to power their life processes. This mode of existence is completely independent of the sun, challenging our assumptions about what life requires. The discovery of abundant microbial life at Hadal depths has profound implications for astrobiology, the search for life beyond Earth. If microorganisms can thrive in the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench, perhaps they could also exist in similarly extreme environments elsewhere in the solar system. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, with their subsurface oceans and volcanic activity, become plausible candidates for extraterrestrial life. Life at the bottom of the Mariana Trench depends on a food web fundamentally different from anything found at the surface. Without sunlight, there can be no photosynthesis, and without photosynthesis, there can be no plants. The entire ecosystem must derive its energy from alternative sources. The primary source of food in the Hadal zone is marine snow, the constant rain of organic material falling from the productive surface waters above. This material consists of dead organisms, fecal pellets, mucus webs, and other debris that drift slowly downward through miles of water. By the time it reaches the bottom of the trench, most of this material has been consumed by organisms at intermediate depths, but enough remains to support the Hadal community. Larger food falls are rare but significant events in the deep-sea ecosystem. When a whale dies and sinks to the seafloor, it provides a massive input of energy that can support a localized community for years or even decades. These whale falls become islands of abundance in the desert of the deep, attracting scavengers and decomposers from great distances. At hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, an alternative food web exists. Here, chemical energy from Earth's interior supports communities of chemosynthetic bacteria that form the base of local food chains. These communities can achieve remarkable productivity, rivaling or exceeding the richest surface ecosystems. However, no hydrothermal vents have been confirmed in the Mariana Trench itself. The organisms of the Hadal zone have adapted to a feast or famine existence. Food arrives unpredictably and must be exploited quickly before competitors consume it. Between feeding opportunities, organisms must survive on stored energy, reducing their metabolism to minimum levels and waiting for the next meal to arrive. The creatures of the Mariana Trench have evolved an astonishing array of adaptations to survive their extreme environment. These modifications affect every aspect of their biology, from the molecular level to their overall body plans. Reduced or absent eyes are common among deep-sea organisms. In an environment without light, vision is useless, and the energy required to maintain functional eyes can be better allocated to other purposes. Many deep-sea fish have tiny vestigial eyes or no eyes at all. They navigate and find food using other senses: vibration detection, chemical sensing, and electrical field perception. Body size in the deep ocean tends toward extreme. Some organisms grow very large, taking advantage of the cold temperatures and lack of predators. Others remain very small, reducing their energy requirements and increasing their surface area for absorbing oxygen and nutrients. The moderate sizes that dominate surface ecosystems are relatively rare in the deep. Slow metabolism is nearly universal at great depths. The cold temperatures and scarcity of food make a fast-paced lifestyle impossible. Deep-sea organisms grow slowly, reproduce slowly, and move slowly. They may live for decades or even centuries, far longer than their surface relatives. Flexible bodies help organisms survive the transition between depths. Species that move through the water column must cope with changing pressure as they ascend or descend. Rigid structures would be damaged by these pressure changes, so many deep-sea organisms have evolved soft, flexible bodies that can adjust to their surroundings. The colors of deep-sea life are often unusual. Red is common because red light does not penetrate to great depths, making red organisms effectively invisible. Black is also common, absorbing the bioluminescent light that many predators use to hunt. Transparent bodies are found in species that inhabit the twilight zone, allowing light to pass through rather than creating a visible silhouette.